Imagine being a teenager having a severe panic attack, reaching out for help, and just being placed on hold by some call center.
Yeah, or finally getting the courage to go down to the front office, right?
Right. Only to be told that the single school counselor in the building, who is already juggling a caseload of like 800 other kids, can pencil you in for a 15-minute slot in 2 weeks.
Which is practically a lifetime for a teenager in crisis.
It is. And sadly, that is the stark everyday reality in so many schools right now. So welcome to today's deep dive. Today we are unpacking a highly specific set of promotional and informational materials from an organization called MentalSpace School.
Yeah, they're a K-12 mental health support service operating in Georgia.
Exactly. And they are offering this radical blueprint to completely dismantle that broken system. So, if you're an administrator sitting in a board meeting right now looking at a super tight budget, the idea of completely overhauling your mental health vendor probably sounds exhausting.
Oh, absolutely. But the data we are looking at in these materials suggests you really can't afford not to. It is a critical pivot point for educational leadership.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the core premise of this text relies on drawing a very hard line in the sand. They look at the old way of doing things, which they label, actually somewhat aggressively, as operating in 2022.
Right. They don't mince words.
No, they don't. And they contrast that sharply with what they are calling the new 2026 standard for school mental health partnerships.
The source material we're analyzing today doesn't just present like a menu of services. It presents a rather devastating critique of the status quo.
Yeah, it really does.
And our primary focus in this deep dive is to explore MentalSpace School's main argument, which is that the current infrastructure is structurally incapable of meeting modern student needs.
Right. This system is fundamentally flawed.
Yeah.
They are telling school leaders, look, if you are still doing things the 2022 way, you are already years behind the curve.
Which is a remarkably bold claim to make in promotional literature. I mean, they aren't merely claiming to have a slightly better platform or, a sleeker app. They are arguing that the previous model of care is obsolete.
Totally obsolete. They are targeting the specific structural failures of those older generic models. The whole architecture of how schools source mental health support is what's actually failing the students.
Exactly. The text paints this picture of a massive bottleneck. The 800 students relying on one overwhelmed in-house counselor or being outsourced to anonymous, distant telehealth corporations.
So if the generic call center model fails because it's too slow and impersonal, what does the exact opposite actually look like in practice?
Right, that's the big question.
Because the text spends a lot of time criticizing this call center therapy model, where a school contracts with a massive national vendor.
Yeah.
To really understand why this fails students, I think about it like having a different substitute teacher every single day in a really complex subject.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Like if you walk into AP Calculus and it's a new face every morning, you never actually get to the math.
You're just starting over every day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You spend half the period just reintroducing yourself, explaining where the syllabus left off, trying to figure out the sub's teaching style. Now, take that exact same dynamic and apply it to something as deeply sensitive as mental health counseling.
Yeah, that is a recipe for disaster.
It is. If a student reaches out in a moment of extreme vulnerability and gets routed to a random voice in a call center, they spend their whole session just providing traumatic background information.
Over and over again.
Yes, having to recount their parents' divorce or their bullying experience to a complete stranger. They never actually get to the work of healing. And the source material makes this point very bluntly. It says, students feel the difference.
What's fascinating here is how MentalSpace School positions its primary solution to this exact psychological barrier.
Right.
Their core value proposition is the concept of a dedicated therapist team assigned directly to a specific school.
Which is huge.
It is. They are aggressively pushing back against the idea of a generic vendor that treats every single school exactly the same. Because, as any educator knows, an algorithm cannot understand the nuance of a specific community.
Oh, 100%. You can't just parachute a one-size-fits-all mental health program into a building and expect it to resonate.
No, you really can't. I mean, a high school in a rural district has a completely different culture, different socioeconomic stressors, different family dynamics than a middle school in a dense urban center.
The students are going to see right through it.
And that is why the text emphasizes the specific tangible benefits of this dedicated team approach. They promise consistent relationships. They talk about familiar faces who actually know the building's layout, who know the principal's name, who understand the specific cultural dynamics of the neighborhood, and, they get to know the families over time.
That's such a different approach.
It is. The material argues that it's this consistency, the building of actual long-term trust that truly changes behavior. It's a stark contrast to the 2022 way, which is just pinning a passive hotline number to a bulletin board.
Right. Expecting a sophomore in the middle of a depressive episode to dial a random number on a flyer, navigate an automated phone tree, and just hope they get routed to someone who understands them. It's setting the system up for failure.
Exactly. MentalSpace is explicitly stating that they integrate into the unique environment. They are pitching a shift from passive availability to an active, embedded presence in the school.
So they are fundamentally trying to rewrite the definition of what a school should demand from a vendor. But here's where it gets really interesting, because I want to push back on their timeline a little bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
So the text lays out this extensive 2026 checklist that supposedly separates the legacy vendors from the real partners.
Right, the new standard.
Yeah. But they explicitly state that the old criteria, meaning things like having licensed providers, being HIPAA compliant, accepting major insurance, that those are now just table stakes.
Yeah, they dismiss them completely.
Right. They dismiss these things as operating in 2022. But let's look at the reality of educational funding. Just a couple of years ago, if a school managed to scrape together the budget to get a mental health program that had licensed clinical providers and somehow navigated the absolute bureaucratic nightmare of insurance billing,
Which is incredibly difficult, yes.
that was considered a massive victory. So why is this promotional text now dismissing those massive hurdles as mere table stakes?
Well, it speaks to how rapidly the baseline expectations and, frankly, the severity of the mental health crisis have shifted in educational support. What was considered a huge win in 2022 is now viewed as the bare minimum for entry, because it didn't solve the core issue of access.
That makes sense.
Yeah. MentalSpace is arguing that simply having a license and following privacy laws doesn't actually guarantee that a student is getting timely, effective care.
Right.
Think of the old 2022 model like an emergency room. You only go when things are completely disastrous, you wait hours or even days to be seen, and you are treated by a random doctor who doesn't know your history.
Oh, that's a really good way to frame it.
But the 2026 MentalSpace model is presented as the equivalent of having a primary care physician who actually lives in your neighborhood. They know your baseline, they spot the symptoms before they become a full-blown emergency, and they treat you on the same day.
Okay, that makes the distinction much clearer. So let's look at the actual mechanics of this 2026 checklist. How does this neighborhood primary care model function within a school?
They break down the distinctions systematically. Let's look at access first. The old model might have offered therapy, but it often came with a 2-week wait list.
Yeah.
For a teenager whose brain is still developing, whose emotional regulation is volatile, a 2-week wait for an intervention is an eternity.
The crisis for a high schooler doesn't neatly schedule itself for 2 weeks out on a Tuesday afternoon.
Exactly. By the time the appointment arrives, the crisis has either escalated into a disaster or the student has completely dissociated from the problem.
If they are spiraling on a Tuesday morning, they need an intervention on a Tuesday morning.
So the 2026 standard, according to the text, is same-day teletherapy access for students, instantaneous connection with their dedicated team.
Wow. Same day.
Yeah. And next they look at the scope of availability. The material contrasts the traditional 9 to 5 availability, which, only covers the hours a student is in the building, with a full 204/7 crisis response.
Because a student's panic attack or a domestic incident at home doesn't wait for the morning bell to ring.
Precisely. MentalSpace provides crisis response training for the staff and ensures there is a direct line to help whenever it's needed, day or night.
That's a massive shift. What else is on this new standard checklist?
They emphasize highly specialized comprehensive care that includes specific protocols for suicide and violence prevention. But critically, they highlight the absolute necessity of having a culturally competent, diverse provider panel. It goes back to our earlier point about understanding the specific community.
Right.
If a student feels alienated by the school system, they need to be able to speak with a professional who genuinely understands their cultural context, their language, and their background.
Because if the overarching goal of this entire system is building trust, having a diverse panel of therapists ensures that students can actually find someone they see themselves in, someone they feel safe opening up to.
Exactly.
And looking at the source material, there's another point that really stood out to me on this checklist, which is staff wellness.
Yes. That is a very deliberate and necessary inclusion in their pitch. The text explicitly states that staff wellness must be integrated, not siloed away from student care.
I think that's a brilliant strategic move for a company pitching to administrators.
Mm-hmm.
Because, look, if you have a 10th grade teacher who is burning out, who is carrying the secondary trauma of dealing with 30 kids a day who are struggling with their own mental health,
It's exhausting.
that teacher cannot be an effective academic or emotional support system. MentalSpace is essentially telling schools that they have to help their teachers put their own oxygen masks on first.
That's exactly it. They provide a direct line to help when the staff needs it, alongside offering family counseling. It's treating the school as a whole ecosystem, rather than just treating the students in a vacuum.
Which is so much more sustainable.
Right. And to return to your earlier pushback about the immense difficulty of navigating insurance, which used to be that massive hurdle for schools, MentalSpace doesn't just vaguely claim they accept insurance.
Right, they get specific.
Very specific. The source material provides a highly detailed, extensive list of coverage to prove their accessibility. They list BCBS, Cigna, Aetna, UHC, Humana, Peach State, CareSource, and Amerigroup.
That covers a lot of ground.
It does. But the single most impactful logistical detail they highlight in this entire document is that for Medicaid, the cost is $0.
Wait, $0 for Medicaid?
Zero.
That completely removes the financial barrier for the most vulnerable student populations in the state.
Mm-hmm.
That's not just a logistical detail on a brochure. That is a massive equity issue being solved right there on the page.
It really is. By checking all these boxes, same-day access, 247 crisis response, culturally diverse providers, integrated staff wellness, and comprehensive insurance coverage, including $0 Medicaid, they build their case.
Yeah.
They argue that any vendor not offering this comprehensive level of service is fundamentally failing the school.
So what does this all mean? I mean, they've built a very compelling, very comprehensive system on paper. The checklist is robust.
Yeah, it looks
The
good.
dedicated team makes logical sense. But as an administrator reading this, my immediate reaction is to look for the catch.
Naturally.
How do we actually measure the success of this dedicated team approach? Because it's very easy to put same-day access on a sleek brochure. And it sounds wonderful to say, we build consistent relationships. But are there actual hard metrics that prove this 2026 model works? Or is this just about creating a warmer, fuzzier school environment?
Well, the source material clearly anticipates that exact skepticism from superintendents and school boards. They do not rely on heartwarming anecdotes. They provide very specific, hard outcome statistics.
Okay, what do they have?
They report an 89% improvement in attendance.
Wow.
Yeah. They show a 92% reduction in anxiety among the students utilizing the service.
92%.
And on the broader community side, they boast an 85% family satisfaction rate.
Wait, let's pause right there. An 89% improvement in attendance. A 92% reduction in anxiety.
I know, they're massive numbers.
Those numbers sound almost too good to be true for any educational intervention. How are they achieving that? What is the actual mechanism connecting a teletherapy session to a kid showing up for first period?
Right, it seems disconnected until you look at the psychology. To understand those numbers, you have to look at what is generally called school avoidance or school refusal.
Okay.
When a student has severe, unmanaged anxiety, the prospect of walking into a crowded hallway or sitting through a high-pressure exam, it triggers a physiological fight-or-flight response.
Like actual panic.
Exactly. And the easiest way to relieve that immediate panic is to simply stay home.
Right.
But that leads to missing assignments, falling behind academically, which in turn creates even more anxiety about returning to school. It is a vicious, self-reinforcing cycle.
So the anxiety directly causes the absenteeism.
Yes. But when that same student knows they have a familiar, trusted therapist they can access on the exact same day, their anxiety spikes. It interrupts that cycle of school avoidance.
Oh, I see.
They don't have to stay home to avoid the panic attack. They can go to school knowing there's a reliable safety net waiting for them.
That makes a lot of sense.
The same day, Access manages the anxiety, dropping it by 92%, according to their figures. And because the anxiety is managed, the student actually walks through the front doors.
That is a staggering metric for a school administrator. Because attendance is the entire ballgame.
It really is.
If a kid isn't in the seat,
Mhm.
they aren't learning.
Yeah.
And honestly, the school state funding often gets severely penalized when attendance drops.
Exactly. It connects the clinical outcomes directly to the educational outcomes. It proves that mental health isn't just some extracurricular add-on or a luxury. It is a fundamental prerequisite for learning.
And while those clinical and educational outcomes are highly compelling, there is another critical layer to this material that administrators cannot ignore.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the compliance and legislative reality driving this shift in Georgia.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
The source text explicitly details their strict data practices, noting that they are both HIPAA and FERPA compliant.
Let's clarify that for our listeners who might not deal with educational compliance daily, because balancing HIPAA and FERPA is notoriously difficult.
Oh, it's a nightmare for schools.
It really is. HIPAA is the federal law that protects a patient's medical and mental health records. FERPA is the federal law that protects a student's educational records, things like grades, attendance, disciplinary history.
Right.
So schools operate under FERPA. Outside medical providers operate under HIPAA.
And the friction between those two laws is a massive headache. Like, if a contracted therapist learns something about a student's mental state, can they legally share that with the principal to arrange academic accommodations? Which privacy law applies.
It gets so messy.
It does. But MentalSpace is advertising that their system natively aligns health privacy with educational privacy laws, completely removing that legal liability from the school's shoulders.
Which is a huge relief for a district.
Absolutely. But more urgently than federal privacy laws, the material introduces a ticking legislative clock specific to their region.
Yes. This is where the promotional material pivots from offering nice-to-have service to addressing an absolute mandate.
Yeah. The material repeatedly references Georgia's HB 268, and it points to a very specific, hard deadline, July 2026.
Right. And for our listeners outside of Georgia, HB 268 isn't just a suggestion from the Department of Education. It is a strict legislative mandate requiring schools to have actionable, measurable threat assessment and mental health protocols in place by July 2026.
It's mandatory.
Exactly. If a school doesn't have a comprehensive system to identify and support students in crisis, they are in a direct violation of state law.
And MentalSpace School uses this impending deadline as a major strategic selling point. They state that they have HB 268 compliance support built directly into their workflow.
Meaning an administrator doesn't have to hire a new therapy vendor and then separately hire a compliance officer to audit that vendor's work against the new state legislation.
Right, they don't have to double up.
MentalSpace acts as the compliance buffer.
It brilliantly transitions MentalSpace from being just a clinical solution for the students to being a vital administrative solution for the school leadership.
They're solving multiple problems at once.
They are offering to shoulder the immense burden of a state mandate. When they say a school is operating in 2026, they are literally talking about being ready for this July 2026 legislative deadline.
Wow.
If your current vendor isn't actively managing your HB 268 compliance, the material argues you are legally and administratively exposed.
I have to say, from a purely strategic standpoint, that is a brilliant pitch to a superintendent.
Oh, absolutely.
First, you get the emotional and clinical victory. We're going to fix your 800-to-1 counselor ratio. We're going to get your students same-day help with a dedicated team. And we're going to interrupt the school avoidance cycle to boost your attendance by 89%.
Which is already a massive win.
Right. And then you get the logistical victory on top of it. We're going to make sure the state of Georgia doesn't penalize you in July 2026. And we're going to navigate the nightmare of FOPA and HIPAA data alignment for you.
It is a highly calibrated, comprehensive argument. It attempts to address the deep anxieties of the student, the burnout of the teacher, the concerns of the parent, and the legal liabilities of the superintendent simultaneously.
To bring all of this together and summarize the journey we've just taken through these materials, we are looking at a blueprint that fundamentally moves away from the problem of generic, overwhelmed therapy systems.
Yeah, it's a whole new era.
The days of a single counselor drowning under a massive caseload, or a student in crisis being routed to a sterile call center and having to repeat their trauma to a stranger. Those days are being aggressively pushed out. In their place, MentalSpace School is presenting this modern, integrated 2026 model. It's a system that boasts same-day access instead of 2-week wait lists, 24/7 crisis response, $0 Medicaid access to remove financial barriers, and a dedicated team that actually understands the school's unique culture.
It's comprehensive.
And they back up these claims with hard metrics. That massive 89% improvement in attendance and 92% drop in anxiety, all while keeping the school legally compliant for the upcoming HB 268 deadline.
Right.
For any administrators, educators, or parents out there listening who are realizing their local schools might still be stuck in 2022, the text provides direct contact details to schedule a partnership conversation. You can find them online at mentalspaceschool.com, or you can email them directly at mentalspaceschool@checkedtherapy.com.
This raises an important question, though, and it is something I think is worth considering deeply long after we finish analyzing this specific promotional text.
Yeah, what's that?
We've talked extensively about the source material's insistence that mental health staff must know the building's specific culture and that staff wellness must be integrated seamlessly alongside student care.
Mhm.
If we follow this trajectory to its logical conclusion, if mental health care becomes as deeply embedded, as invisible, and as instantaneous in our schools as the Wi-Fi or the electricity we use every day,
Oh, wow.
how might that fundamentally change the very definition of what a school is meant to be in a student's life?
That is a profound thought to leave on. Moving from a purely academic institution where you just go to learn math and history to a holistic center for community well-being and emotional regulation. It changes everything about how we view education. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the evolving landscape of student support. Keep questioning the systems around you. Keep looking for those 2026 standards in your own communities, and we highly encourage you to keep exploring the rapid changes happening in education. We will see you on the next deep dive.